Antiquity Unveiled. The most marvelous revelations of the 19th century concerning the origin of Christianity by Jonathan M. Roberts. And, well, the revelations of mediums. Let's get through that and go to the meat of the text, which completely makes the mention of the mediums obsolete now, doesn't it? Potamon, the great Alexandrian reformer. Sir, there has never been a religious idea promulgated on earth in latter times that has not had its counterpart in more ancient religious systems. The principal quarrels of the Christian Church have been over the doctrines of the Trinity, or the effort to make three out of one. This has been the occasion of a vast amount of bloodshed. 25 million innocent lives. Because people weren't Christian, or they weren't the right type of Christian. More than all other things combined, even if you say, oh well, Muslim majority countries have killed 13 million. But has Islam been the reason why innocent people have been attacked? No, because civilians were never part of those wars. Forced conversions, wars for slaves, none of that ever occurred with Islam. But in my day, I tried to reconcile these creedal ideas of all religious systems and to amalgamate them together. But the same difficulties met my efforts that met yours today. Ecclesiastics have but one means to keep their hold upon the people, and that is the encouragement of ignorance and bigotry. Wow. It depends on which religious officials, right? Wrest these from them when their power is gone, trying to regenerate old ideas, for trying to make a better system or more systematic religion. I was met by curses and ended my life in exile. I was banished because I tried to purify the then existing religious systems. But you have a far better day to work in, because you have the aid of the greatest art of modern times, namely the art of printing, and you can scatter truth all over the land. Keep on with your work, and although you may be persecuted, there is one thing they cannot do. They cannot banish you or take your life at this day. All the good you moderns enjoy has been the work of men who were infidels to the prevailing creeds and beliefs of their times. And in conclusion, I want to say a few words on the absolute proofs of spirit existence. We dare not, as spirits, give the masses of the present day absolute proof of spirit life, for should we do so, they would not perform their mission here. Once in possession of the absolute proof of the afterlife, you would find this people becoming a nation of suicides. First, they must understand the true duties of mortal existence before they can safely receive the absolute proofs of spirit existence. I am Potamon. Now, if the Christian doctrine was right, that all you have to do is say Jesus, you can live a bad life and don't have to pay for anything hereafter because you're preemptively forgiven, and even if you kill yourself, yeah, you'd have suicides left and right. But even the spirits here, even the demons that are taking part in the seances, are having better doctrines than some of what you'll hear in a church. And that's, I guess that's the startling revelation, is that even the forbidden arts are giving forth answers that... But let's go on to the more scientifically based part of what's being said, which will, like the others, I'm sure will render the including of the medium account unnecessary. On receiving the above communication, and having no knowledge ourself of who Potamon was, we concluded to look the matter up, with the exception of a 4-line mention of him in the American Encyclopedia. We could find nothing concerning him in either of the English or American encyclopedias or biographical dictionaries. After a protracted search, we found the following reference to this great religious reformer in the Nouvelle Biographie Générale, published in Paris in 1862, of which we give our translation. Potamon, a Greek philosopher of the Alexandrian school, was born at Alexandria and lived in the 3rd century of the Christian era. It is true that according to Suidas, who speaks of Erasis and Potamon, this philosopher should have been contemporaneous with the Emperor Octavius Augusta, but Porphyry, in his life of Plotinus, chapter 9, said positively that Potamon, according to his understanding, treated of a new philosophy of which he laid the foundation. Now Plotinus was born in 250 of the Common Era and died at the age of 65, and evidently lived in the 3rd century of our era. The same ought to be the case with Potamon. Now, what was this new philosophy of which Porphyry speaks, and of which he represents Potamon as the founder, according to these descriptions of Plotinus? It is found contained in 2 works, one of which was a contemporary on the Timaeus of Plato, and the other a treatise on first principles. Of these treatises, there remains absolutely nothing, but we know something of the second from a passage of Diogenes Laertius in the introduction of his book on the lives and doctrines of illustrious philosophers. It is but a short time, said this biographer, since an eclectic school was instituted by Potamon of Alexandria, which selected from the doctrines of all the different sects 2 things, Potamon explained, are necessary to discern reason. On the other, are necessary to discern truth. On one part, the principle that judges is to say reason. On the other, the exact representation of the objects of our judgment. As to the principles of things, he recognized 4: matter, quality, action, and place. In other words, of what and by whom a thing is made, how it is made, and where it is made, he established as the aim to which all ought to tend a perfectly virtuous life, without excluding at all times the needs of the body, nor those things external to it. The results of this passage from Diogenes Laertius combined with the testimony of Porphyry, are first, that Potamon was the founder of the eclectic school, and that probably the school owes its name to him. Secondly, he adopted the peripatetic doctrine relative to the principle of things. The third, that in ethics he had attempted a kind of conciliation between Stoicism and Epicureanism. And C. Mallet wrote that. In the light of the foregoing spirit communication, it would seem that Suidas was right, as to the time in which Potamon lived and taught eclecticism, and that Porphyry and M. Mallet, the French author, were wrong. They say that eclecticism is a symptom of autism. But if autism is a sensitivity and perhaps an awareness of what other people have, instead of being all object referral among one path, they realize, based on their own awareness, that maybe they need stuff from different areas, and so they are more likely to get something that works for them than being ultra-conservative. Potamon undoubtedly lived and taught under the Roman Emperor Octavius Augustus at Alexandria, and not in the 3rd century as erroneously claimed by M. Mallet on the authority of Porphyry. It would seem to settle the question as to the disputed age in which Diogenes Laertius lived and wrote. Speaking of the latter, M. Aube says, "We know absolutely nothing of the life of Diogenes Laertius, and it can hardly be affirmed that he was born at Laertia, a city of Sicilia, and in what year is unknown. We are reduced to conjectures as to the epoch in which he lived, and on this point critics have widely differed. Some, by evident confusion, made him live under the reign of Augustus, others at the time of Constantine. Now, as Diogenes Laertius said in the writing of Potamon, that the latter had a short time before established a new school of philosophy, it becomes almost certain that Diogenes was contemporaneous with Potamon, and that they both lived and wrote under the reign of the Roman Emperor Augustus, or about the time when it is said that Jesus Christ lived and taught on earth. Is it not a most significant fact that so little is now known of these two great eclectic authors, while their teaching and writings have been surreptitiously appropriated by the Christian priesthood and attributed to the fictitious man God Jesus? In view of the importance that we attach to the spirit return of Potamon, we cannot refrain from laying before our readers the following translation of a passage from M. Aube's sketch of the life of this great author. The work of Diogenes Laertius has for its title Lives and Opinions of the Most Illustrious Philosophers. It comprises 10 books, with the preface, which contains some general considerations on the origin of philosophy, the division of the schools, and the different parties among philosophers. Diogenes commences by opposing the opinion of those who place the cradle of philosophy in the East. Grecian philosophy, according to him, was autochthonous, native to Greece. The first period comprises 7 sages. The second, which is the age of development and maturity, commenced with Anaximander and Pythagoras, and ended with Chrysippus and Epicurus, and is embraced entirely in 2 schools: the Ionian school, of which Anaximander, the disciple of Thales, is the chief, and Chrysippus was the last representative, and the Italian school, of which Pythagoras is the father, which became extinct with Epicurus. Such was the plan of Diogenes as set forth in the preface to his work. It cannot be denied that this plan was extremely simple. But at the same time, we cannot be astonished that this historian made so readily an abstract of the most perceptible differences which distinguish the various philosophical doctrines, and that he mingled thus arbitrarily the most opposite schools of philosophy. I gotta give myself a philosophy playlist for this channel, don't I? It will be seen from that extract that Diogenes' writings, that as a historian he was governed by the eclectic philosophy and sought to cooperate with his contemporary Potamon in promoting harmony among the rival religious partisans of their epoch. It is a sad outcome of their benevolent efforts that the Christian priesthood, who sought to turn their beneficent labors to their personal advantage, should have succeeded in concealing from their fellow men the true source of their stolen and corrupted eclectic treatises. The reason why Diogenes Laertius had so little to say about his contemporary, the greatest of all reformers, Potamon, is rendered very evident from the statement made in his communication, or the communication concerning him, that he was banished for his efforts to bring a religion of peace to his fellow men. We would have the reader to remark, especially, that the communicating spirit has nothing to say about Potamon as the founder of a school of philosophy, but expressly claims that he sought to reconcile varying critical ideas of all religions. For this humane and benevolent effort, he incurred the united animosity of the prevailing religious sects of his country, which he was banished and died in exile. The parallel which, as a spirit, he draws between his own experience and that which he reminds us we are passing through is not the least significant feature of the communication. Time and space will now admit of a more extended presentation of the incidences connected with the receipt of that communication. We will, therefore, point out a few things in connection with it that seem to us of pregnant importance. There can be little, if any, reasonable doubt that Potamon lived at the very time when it is said Jesus lived, and that he sought to institute, as the communication says, a better system, or a more systematic religion, that although the writings of all other founders of religious systems in Greece and Alexandria have been preserved and brought down to our time, with the exception of the brief reference to him and his writings, by his contemporary Diogenes Laertius, that there is not an authentic trace of his writings preserved, that he was an illustrious philosopher and worthy to rank with the founders of other great Grecian schools. In the estimation of the eclectic biographer Diogenes, and the latter should have ventured to say so little concerning Potamon and his writings, or if he said more than has come down to us, that what he did say was suppressed by those who sought to rob this great religious reformer of the credit of his beneficent labors, that his teachings were condemned by the more powerful of the great revival religious sects, or schools of philosophy, as they were called, that then prevailed, that, as the communication says, he was banished for his attempt to reconcile the contradictory creeds and dogmas of the various religious systems of his day, and died in exile, that the original writings, from which those of the present New Testament, as it is called, were derived, were in the Greek language, that they are conceded to have obtained from Alexandria, the native city of Potamon, and the scene of his great attempt to reform the prevailing religious systems of his time, that the Christian fathers, so called, should have utterly ignored Potamon, the great founder of the religious systems, that they appropriated and attributed falsely to God, in order that they might, and the more readily and thoroughly rule over their ignorant and too confiding fellow beings. All these and many other facts point most strongly, if not positively, to the conclusion that Potamon, a great-souled, learned, and benevolent Greek, was the true author of the religious system, which no doubt greatly modified and altered to suit the interest of the ambitious and tyrannical priest, has come down to us as the work of Jesus Christ. But, by far, the most significant fact of all is the labored efforts of modern Christian sectaries and writers to show that Potamon did not found his eclectic system of religion until the 3rd century, and not at the very epoch in which it is said Jesus Christ lived and taught, as Suidas stated. And when he said Potamon should have been contemporaneous with Emperor Octavius Augustus, it is equally significant that the same efforts have been put forward to make it appear that Theognis Laertius did not live and write his biographical work on the lives and doctrines of illustrious philosophers until the 3rd century or later, the latter having, as aforementioned, said in speaking of Potamon, "It is but a short time since an eclectic school was instituted by Potamon of Alexandria, which chose from the doctrines among the different sects. The Christian plagiarist could not afford to have known that the author whose writings they were stealing lived at the very time when they pretended their fictitious man-god lived." Now, something that's very clear to anybody who, pays attention, is the archaeological evidence is making the Christian text later and a lot of other things earlier. Centuries, thousands of years before Christianity. Oh, no, this happened after Christianity. They were just mimicking Christianity. Nope, 4,000 years before. Carbon dating proves it. There's other evidence that proves it. It is amazing that so monstrous and manifest a priestly fraud, as is the pretense that Jesus Christ was the author of the contents of the New Testament, should have remained so long concealed, but for the fact that Potamon, the Grecian sage and reformer, at last found the means, through a poor, persecuted, and uneducated medium, to return after nearly 1900 years to assert his place in the history of literature and learning, the great mysterious secret of the real origin of the Christian religion would have remained with the Catholic priesthood, the only Christian priesthood in existence. The Protestant clergy of the various dissenting sects know nothing whatever of the religious systems about which they claim to know so much, and at the same time confess that they know so little. Question them about what they preach for positive truth, and they will tell you that it is all mystery, mystery, mystery. How far the religious doctrines and practices selected by Potamon from all the prevailing religions of his day have been retained by his Christian plagiarist may never be fully known, but the latter have copied them largely. Seems very obvious. It's a conceded fact that the Gospels according to St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke, and St. John, as well as the Acts of the Apostles, are but modified versions of some older writing or writings, the author or authors of which have been most unaccountably concealed. There could have been a Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that picked up and said, oh, well, let's have a version of this with this. So the little differences are explained through usurping of previous texts and Christianizing it. It has not been pretended that Jesus Christ ever wrote a line of the contents of the New Testament, nor can it be seriously pretended that such a founder of a new religion lived at the time the Christian writers assign as the epoch of his earthly career. If it be once established that Diogenes Laertius lived and wrote during the reign of the Emperor Augustus, as we are ready to show, was the fact against the world, M. Aub has fully testified to the unprejudiced manner in which Diogenes has presented the doctrinal tenets and creeds of the prevailing religious sects of that early age, and there cannot be a doubt that had any such founder of a religion such as Jesus represented to have been, lived and taught the doctrines attributed to him, Diogenes Laertius would have included him in his biographical list of illustrious philosophers. Now, let me remind you, there's a huge difference between church and religion. Churchy and religious, churchly and spiritual. Let's remember what those differences are. Even Suidas, the Greek lexicographer, who stated that Diogenes Laertius should have been contemporaneous with the Emperor Octavius Augustus and shared the same fate as Bethel, Potamon, and Diogenes at the hands of the Christian priesthood, who prior to the discovery of the art of printing for 400 years monopolized the learning of the world. Some Christian authors have sought to make it appear that no such person as Suidas lived, and that the name was assumed by the author of the writings bearing his name. Others have sought to show that he lived and wrote as late as the 4th century in order to remove him as far as possible from the time in which he actually wrote. There can be little doubt that Suidas lived and wrote in or near the reign of Augustus, but where he lived seems not to be known. Giraldi, the Italian poet and archaeologist, writing of Suidas in the 16th century, says that it was under the reign of Augustus that he lived. Judging from the obscurity thrown over his history by Christian writers generally, we conclude that Giraldi was correct. He deriving his knowledge upon the subject from the sufficient data in the Vatican at Rome, where Leo X allowed him to reside when visiting Rome with his pupil Hercules, son of Count Rangon, afterwards known as Cardinal Rangon, for some reason sufficient to his papal masters, Adrian VI and Clement VII. He never acquired a higher position than apostolic prothonotary. We infer that Giraldi is archaeological researches had learned too much concerning the true origin of the Christian religion, and hence was neglected and persecuted. Thomas Aquinas, remember Thomas Aquinas? What he said? He figured out stuff that kind of made him stop his work. Such a great defender of Catholicism. What did he figure out? The simple fact that he had discovered that Potamon, Diogenes Laertius, and Suidas were contemporaneous authors under the reign of Augustus at the time of Jesus Christ, was falsely alleged to have lived, was enough to have cost him his life, and no doubt it would have done so only for his influence with the people in his priest-ridden age and country. In view, therefore, of the circumstances that we have hurriedly thrown together in the great pressure of our general editorial labors, all tending so strongly to corroborate the statements of the foregoing spirit communication, we conclude that the communication is authentically from the spirit of the founder of the eclectic school of Alexandria, that he lived at the precise time when Jesus Christ is said to have lived, and that he attempted the greatest and noblest religious reformation that is known in the past history of the world, that Diogenes Laertius and Suidas, contemporaneous writers of that day, should have noticed Potamon as the founder of a grandly beneficent school of religious reformers, and that should have made no mention of Jesus Christ as engaged in such a work at the only period when it is pretended that he was so engaged, puts an end forever to the misrepresentation that the teachings and inculcations of the New Testament were the work of any such human or divine being as Jesus. Every rational person might have known that the writings of the New Testament were the work of a man or a school of men who sought to blend such portions of preceding creeds, doctrines, ceremonies, practices, and religious formulas into a single religion that would serve to harmonize and unite mankind in a common effort to advance the welfare of all. No person can attentively read the New Testament writings and not perceive the fact that there is hardly a paragraph of them which does not contain the very clear evidence that it is but the slightly modified reproduction of some tenet or doctrine of some one or more of the various religious systems prevailing at the time of their production, or that prevailed in the reign of Augustus, when Potamon lived, and founded the eclectic school of religious instruction, the religious systems of China, India, Persia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Palestine, and even the Druidical system of northern and western Europe, were largely drawn from to make the eclectic system of religion founded by Potamon, a religion which for a period of more than 100 years after he died in exile was suppressed, and then revived as being of divine origin, and attributed to Es. Yes, likely. Es is the Phoenician name of the god Bacchus, or the sun personified, the etymological meaning of that title being I, the one, and S, the fire or light. Oh, kind of like Lucifer. Light I bring. Light, Pharos, illumination. Luxepharos. Are taken as one word as Es, the one light. There is none other than the light of St. John's Gospel, and this name is to be found everywhere on Christian altars, both in Protestant and Catholic. IHS, by the way. Thus clearly showing the Christian religion is but a modification of the Oriental sun worship attributed to Zoroaster. The same letters IHS, which are in the Greek text, are read by the Christians Jes, and the Roman Christian priesthood added the terminus us, or ups, or onder, making the name of the fictitious author of the eclectic system of Potamon Jesus, Jesus, O thou. This was a tub thrown to the Parsi whale by the successors of Potamon. To that name the latter added the name of the Hindu deity Krishna, as the representative of the new system, making not Potamon his founder, but Jesus Christ, the compound deified myth of the Orientals and Hindus, the nominal head of the church. And we remember that Bacchus, what happened with Bacchus? Do you remember this? Well, the case with Bacchus is that there was a text written about him that's pretty much the same as the Gospel of John, the earlier versions, that is. Basically, they wrote in Jesus instead of Bacchus. And this was admitted. Even the early Christians, Irenaeus and stuff, knew that this was the case.